Well, now we're on the record. So,
record indeed.
as our viewers may already be aware, a few weeks ago, our great Google overlords, announced that they had assisted in the development of a program which was able to capably play professional human Go players, which was really a development of some significance. Now, if people aren't following that, it may not sound that momentous, but the reality is that this was an attainment which was thought to be yet several years off. So there's something of a quantum leap. And Devin knows more about it, I think, than I do. So why don't you account for that? Or if you'd like, give us a little recap of the development and its significance, Devin, since you're sort of more involved. And you might also talk about the game of Go, because I sometimes forget that despite its popularity in other parts of the world, it's still a kind of, it's not a fringe game, but it's not a game which your sort of average man on the street necessarily with which he necessarily has acquaintance.
Yeah, so Go is an ancient Chinese game, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 years old. We're not entirely sure of its actual origins. And you had it spread from China to both Korea and Japan, and then eventually the rest of the world. And so we learned the game from Japanese, and that's why we call it Go. In Chinese, it's called Weiqi, which means surrounding game. In Korea, Paduk, depending on how you say it. And in Japanese, it's Ego. And so we just cut off the I at the beginning of that and call it Go. And so, it's kind of always been heralded as one of the four ancient arts, very, if you were to accomplish anything in life, it would be calligraphy, music, Go, and whatever else. I can't remember the fourth, actually. Excuse me. But what'd you say, Tom?
Was it archery or is it flower?
Archery. A flower arrangement. It might have been flower arrangement.
If the tradition of which you're speaking is Japanese, right? Because it all sounded as if it's Chinese, but I don't know. In any event, go on. I'm going to occasionally mute myself to mitigate the background noise since I'm in a restaurant. So.
Okay. Thanks.
That's why I made somebody forget that that's done.
Yeah. Okay. So, Go's been now spreading its way through the U.S., Europe, and even South and Central Americas, of which I've actually traveled to play Go at, both Asia as well as Ecuador and other countries. Big fan. So I started playing about 3 years ago. And one of the pride points of many Go players is always, computers can beat humans at chess, but Go is special. Go is special because it takes both left brain and right brain. It takes the logical, but it also takes the creativity. It's not just about reading. That's important, of course, but it's not just about the logic. It's also about what feels right and the art of the moves. And so it's been interesting to watch previous AIs try to accomplish beating Go because historically they've really been lackluster. Up until even just a few years ago, the skill level I'm at now was better than any AI possible. And these days, you find AIs around the strength of, medium, strong, amateur. So professionals could easily beat AIs, and even small children who are incredibly good, could beat AIs. Incredibly good is relative because they might be good compared to you and I, but in the Go world, they're not very strong. And so we have a ranking system that we've come up in the Go world, somewhat similar to the ELO ranking of chess. Our ranking is rememorative of some, I think it's jiu-jitsu or martial arts ranking. It's similar. It's the Q and Dan ranking. Dan being black belt and Q being the levels below. So I myself am on the cusp of becoming a first degree black belt, a 1 Dan. I keep announcing I am, and then I'm not quite sure I am, and so that's an interesting path journey for me. So previous to Google and Facebook attempting to create an AI, the strongest computers were a amateur 5 Dan about, and everybody starts at 30 Dan. You work your way up from 30 up to 30 Q. You work your way from 30 Q up to 1 Q, and then you enter black belt Dan up to 9 Dan is the highest. And there's amateur and professional. The professionals are just at another level. Oftentimes they're marked with a P instead of a D in front of their rank. So if you're a 9P, you're actually a 9 Dan professional. So Google has somewhat secretly for the past year or so been working on this AI to play Go. And what's in my mind truly incredible about that is, unlike a lot of past AIs, which start out with maybe the entirety of our Go knowledge kind of downloaded into the program to get off the ground, to teach it, what are the normal openings, what are certain sequences it should have memorized, much like maybe humans kind of learned Go, but you can just start it off with that. Google did something different, as my understanding goes, and you can interject. You watched similar videos I did, but they, and this is for our viewers, they created a learning algorithm that and did that for 2 different synapses with a couple different breakdowns under each of those levels. And instead of, again, telling the program what to do, they just gave it these simple objectives of the game of Go and then let it off. So the objective of the game, by the way, is to surround the most territory. For those of you who, again, aren't familiar with Go, it is probably the simplest game, or one of the simplest games ever created. It's part of the beauty. What draws me to it is, while there are a handful of rules, perhaps 5, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I went ahead and I put a link here in the message column to a video. It's about an hour long altogether by a guy, Tim Kington, who Devin knows Tim. But he did a nice little reprise if you want the level of depth about the program AlphaGo that Google developed. So it's there. But let me turn it back over to Devin and let him continue to explain Go. Again, what's sort of astonishing is that despite its simplicity, it gives rise to this sort of cosmic complexity.
Exactly.
Right. There's 5 rules on a grid with 2 sets of your 2 sides, and then
black, white.
But go on. I didn't mean to.
Oh, no, thank you. Tom actually and I, we used to play Go about once. It used to be every morning at one point in time, maybe. But back when we lived closer together.
It's a consuming game. It's interesting, the difference between chess and Go, even though they sort of exist in the same genre. They have a very different emotional valence to me. I don't know if Devin agrees, right? I mean, in both cases, the mind is set with tasks that have an aspect of computation associated with them. But there's just something qualitative. There's like a qualitative difference in how that process is experienced with Go. Perhaps in virtue of the fact that the sheer plethora of possibilities that confront you really from the outset, you are exposed to the limitation of a merely computational task. You have to really rely on your intuition. And after a game of like a solid game of Go, I would say it puts me in this headspace, which is not dissimilar to what you could experience if you sat down 40 minutes and meditated, where you're just actually sort of removed. I mean, it focuses your consciousness in a way that sort of removes you from your customary mental chatter.
Yeah,
I mean, I am a neophyte. All right, I know, and it's the sort of thing where I could see myself being drawn into it, but then you have to make decisions about what you're doing with your life. And so that's part of the reason why I'm not more involved with it than I am. But that's sort of tangential to the main point here. But I think, Devin, you wanted to pick up on like how you experience playing the game of Go, and not to get too far away from the question of the AI and so forth.
Sure, but to give a backdrop of maybe what it feels like to be playing, and actually the juxtaposition of Go and chess is interesting because it kind of really highlights the difference in culture from east to west. Go, you start with nothing and you place a piece one at a time until you've created kind of fortresses. And once everything's settled, both players decide to pass and the game ends. And you just count your territory and see who wins. It's very peaceful, if you will. There's no checkmate. There's no... there's not a lot. There is capturing, but it's not like killing of a piece or something like that. In fact, you could even every piece is the same. Unlike chess, where there's a hierarchy, in Go, it's also again more Eastern in the way that it's all for the greater good. And in fact, this is interesting in the juxtaposition of strategy games and resemblance to perhaps war or battle. Go does resemble that bigger picture thinking of perhaps the entire war, but resembles the bigger picture thinking of numerous things. You don't have to always relate it to violence.
Well, I mean, another way maybe of putting it is the difference between local and non-local influence.
Exactly.
In that, all right. So for those of the viewers who may not already be acquainted. Your standard game of Go is played on a 21 by 21.
19 by 19.
19 by 19. Sorry.
No worries.
19 by. They do have larger boards, but the standard is 19 by 19. Sorry. In fact, beginners often begin by playing on a 9 by 9, and you can graduate 13 by 13 and so on and so forth. Where was I going with that? Oh, okay. So what happens is you can look at a quadrant, not even or a sixth of the board or something, and there could be a situation and a tension and interplay between the white and the black in this limited sector that can be resolved in so many different ways. And you might choose, as say if you happen to be white, to resolve that situation in a way that would count positively for you if that were the extent of the context. But in virtue of having made that decision, you could have potentially subverted your position elsewhere on the board in at least two senses. The spatial sense, in that, there really is a sort of net of force or influence that spreads throughout the entire board from that vicinity. How those stones are arrayed are going to ramify for what's happening with your stones, even in the opposite quadrant. There's also a temporal dimension in that you have to choose where you're going to prioritize your efforts. And they talk about that in terms of the interplay of influence between black and white, who's driving the initiative, right? That's a concept which is integral to learning the game. So in that way, you don't have to immediately associate it with a martial analog, right? Just the manner in which complexity itself plays out finds a sort of instantiation in the game Go. I did also know, and again, this is the thing about it. You start talking about the game, there's so many dimensions. But in terms of cultural differentiation between chess and Go, one thing that really stands out is the question of handicap. And me and Devin have gone back and forth about this. a little bit, right? Because I actually it drives me batty. But maybe that's just my own ego. I can concede that. Okay, Devin, why don't you explain the handicap system?
Yeah,
Um,
so handicap, or as I started to call it, head start, is a way to differentiate players of varying abilities. So since I've played the game a little bit longer and a little bit stronger than Tom, I often try to cudgel him into accepting a head start in our games. And what this does between players of different strengths is it allows a stronger player who would normally perhaps win. Like in chess, if you play a stronger player, they just win, and that's the end of that. But in Go, you can give this other player 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stones on the board before the stronger player begins, and that allows them to have to maybe struggle a little bit harder to 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 achieve the goal of victory. And so this can be used in varying ways. It can be used in matches between professionals or
Look,
amateurs to make the
we
competition,
have a
more interesting.
caller here. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sure.
Patrick, is he tries to join us? He's calling in. So.
Oh, great.
Hey, hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Patrick.
I'm doing fine. Sorry to interrupt you guys.
No, you're fine. Are you just? Oh, did you just want to listen?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to speak some English. That's all.
Oh, well.
Well, I'm trying to learn. Well, I'm sorry.
What is your native tongue?
I'm from the Netherlands. I'm speaking Dutch. From
Okay.
Europe.
Great.
Yeah.
And Patrick, do you know of the game Go? Have you played?
Patrick, what other?
Sorry? I know. What is going on?
Oh, I was just. We were just wondering if you happen to be acquainted with the board game which we're discussing, the game that we are talking about.
I don't think so.
Well, that's okay. Actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Let me put a link to the Wikipedia page about Go
Okay, thank you.
in the message column. We were just. That's how you learn a language is by listening to native speakers. I'm in the process of trying to strengthen my French.
Okay,
And
that's nice.
so I understand that sometimes to me, listening to French speakers can be quite challenging because they speak so quickly to my
Yeah, true.
untrained ear.
Yeah, that's
So-
true. That's true.
So if you need us to slow down, just let us know.
No. You can keep going on. If I don't understand you, I will say.
All right. So,
But thanks.
oh, you're
Appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thanks for joining us, Patrick. But we were he was talking about, I think, call it head start, or traditionally it's referred to as handicap, but perhaps you're making a differentiation there out of deference to certain sensitivities.
I've only changed the word out of noticing some people. I think you prefer not to have a handicap start because of the egalitarian view we both share. But some people, I think, take it as a sign of an insult to their ability, which to me, I always started out playing Go very humbly, saying, the first proverb I ever learned was lose your first 100 games quickly. And so I've been able to approach it from that perspective. But I definitely see people's, the ego can say, I don't need a handicap, or, that's not the best way to learn. I should lose, full force or something.
The latter point is sort of my disposition, where it's like, well, I don't feel insulted, right?
Mm-hmm.
and you're giving me a handicap. But if I'm trying to learn, I want to learn like sort of baptism by fire. Just throw me in full effect.
Yeah, and that I think is actually the very effective attitude people need to learn Go.
So the counterpoint is that I have to appreciate that people who have been at the game for a while already have a certain familiarity, which makes playing a beginner, frankly, it can be boring, if not at times painful.
Sure.
Okay, so
if there's a huge gap,
both of us, both people want to be enjoying the experience, and part of that enjoyment is introducing a modicum of adversity. And so the beginner, out of deference to the need to have their superior opponent still enjoy the process of the game, should allow should do them the courtesy of taking the handicap or the head start.
Indeed.
Or what. So right,
and
so
an interesting comment.
And the analogy would be like if it was chess. By analogy, like you could like say, okay, I'm going to start, but I'm not going to have my queen or something like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is like just a tangent.
This is a tangent.
We brought up the whole system up because of the difference in like the culture around the game of Go as well as the culture game of chess.
Yeah.
Where I think things are far more aggressive. It's a kind of a more boot camp style when you go into a chess club.
Exactly.
Bring your A game.
Exactly. Yeah. Because there's just it's pretty usually a beat down. But the interesting point to make about handicap also, Stones, in Go is the amount of handicap you take or head start you take, give your opponent, correlates directly to the rank differential. So if you are, say, a 5Q and a 10Q play, the difference between 10 and 5 is 5. So you could, say, give a 5-stone head start to the weaker player, and it would equivocate to a perfectly even game. Maybe someone would win by just a little bit. Now, this isn't always the case, especially among more neophyte players, but definitely oftentimes can work well. So let's get back to then.
Yeah, I was going to say the music went all. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Well, these are interesting facts about Go that could help in your knowledge. Aren't quite necessary, but educating our listeners nonetheless. So, Google's AI, as I was starting to mention earlier, is interesting the way that it didn't start off by downloading, the world's database of Go, and instead they started off by creating a program that just learned to play Go. It had the basic rules, and then it gave the capability of making kind of almost evolutionary improvements as it had more games under its belt. And
so, I think what they did is like they downloaded the KGS game database for strong amateur players.
Correct.
And then what they first tasked the program to learn is the ability to predict the next move in those games.
Exactly.
Not the best move, but the next move.
Yeah.
They're like different phases. Sorry.
No,
go on,
that's good.
Devin.
And so that's, this is the whole kind of interesting thing about the project is that since Go isn't purely logical, and it takes this kind of idea of an inspired or creative next move, being able to feel, understand, influence and of your stones and not just raw territory, and understand, how that move might affect you 100 moves later, stuff like that. Go is a particularly interesting challenge for artificial intelligence because it wouldn't, to be truly good, a computer might have to understand more of that. And so it started to do things exactly like predicting the next move. And I think it got up somewhere like a 50%, or 53%.
57.
Oh, yeah. 2%
success rate.
Success rate.
If they modified the input, if the computer was permitted knowledge of the prior moves in the game, like a 57 point some percent success rate. If they were just looking at the board position without knowledge of prior moves, it was 55 point something percent.
Yeah.
So go on.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just happened to have looked at the material, so it's still fresh in my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And this is interesting because I myself and other Go players often do this, trying to predict the next move. Oftentimes, we're also trying to predict the best move, really. But maybe 50% of the time, 57% of the time, the best move is the next move or something along those lines. But it's all difficult because, of course, players like you and I are actually relatively weak. We're not very good. Even amateurs, compared to, say, the best player in the world, are relatively unique. Bye, Patrick. Thanks for stopping in.
Thanks. Bye.
Yes. Bye.
So, as it's been looking at these games and kind of trying this prediction model, it also, perhaps you can enlist with your knowledge of the video where it went from there, Tom.
Well, there's what the program AlphaGo, and I don't really have it all in hand, right? But to sort of from the video, which is helpful, what you're looking at is there's sort of really four aspects to how AlphaGo works. There is three what they call policy networks, and then they supplement that with what they call Monte Carlo tree search, which is where you just look at the chain of possible moves, right? Kind of if then, right? If he plays at 3-3, then I go 3-4. If he plays at 3-2, I go, that sort of thing. And in fact, a lot of chess AI is heavily reliant on tree search based approaches. But the weakness of tree search with Go derives from the sheer multitude of possible outcomes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really like you just would not have the time to explore all those possibilities.
On average, at any given time in the game, there are, say, 200 possible one moves. And then from that, there's a branch of, say, 199 moves, possibly after that. So if you were just to do raw searching, it's down all the different trees, it'd be incomprehensibly difficult for a computer.
Yeah. So you still want to have that sort of computational supplement, but it wasn't the focus. The focus was the development of these three so-called policy networks. One was they were SLRL, supervised learning. There's a supervised learning, reinforcement learning, and fast value rollout.
Yes.
Network. Supervised learning was the first thing they developed, really apart from the other elements. And this is what we've already sort of mentioned, where they downloaded the KGS database, which is an internet thing. You guys can go find it. And all the strong amateur players, that's 6 to 9 dan amateur. There's actually a very significant distinction between amateur and pro ranking. So like a 1 dan professional can probably dispatch with comparative ease, say like a 4 dan amateur or something like that. Yeah. I mean, the point is that it's not trivial, the distinction between amateur and pro. That's why I noted, for the sake of exhaustiveness, that those were the ranks that they downloaded. And then what happened was they had them sort of analyze these games, which I think there are around 9 million games or something to that effect, and try and learn how to predict the next best move in those games.
Yes.
And this took them, I want to say that was about a few days or something like that. And then there's this second program called the reinforcement learning. This is, I think, really where the AlphaGo sort of started to set itself apart from other previous efforts that it got. What they basically did was they had the reinforcement learning network play the supervised learning network. And initially, what it was the supervised learning network started to play itself. Initially, they were duplicates.
Yeah.
Okay, with the caveat that the algorithmic task, which was posed to what would become the RL policy network as opposed to the SL policy network, was that instead of trying to predict simply the next move, you try and predict the best move.
Yeah.
And so that's the distinction. And they had the network play itself for around 3 weeks. And they played like several million games.
Yeah.
Okay. So
didn't it actually reach the billions? Perhaps
it might have.
Yeah.
It was like a ridiculous number.
Yeah.
All right. So using this sort of interplay, they just strengthened the computer's predictive capacity.
Which
now
is
the third element.
Real quick. This is reminiscent to me of the Google car, because one of the ideas of computer learning in general is you can have shared experiences perhaps across devices, or even in the medical data field as they come up with Watson. Microsoft works on Watson's AI. Watson being the the computer that competed on it was
Jeopardy.
Jeopardy, thank you. But Watson's actually profession as a computer, as a medical assistant software. And one of the things is diagnostic, is that you can say, add up all those hours of learning for the computer across platforms and all this different stuff. So this game, one of the modems of wisdom that I first learned was lose your first 100 games quickly, because it's playing these 100 games that'll get you better. And there's the idea of 10,000 of hours to mastery and stuff like that. Well, Google was able to play billions of games against itself.
So we haven't even this it's a disjunction where my philosophical reticences are. I'm going to restrain myself until we should finish explaining.
Yeah, but to me it seems
those issues.
Obviously they can play more games and learn perhaps more, quote unquote, than a human could. But obviously we have a higher ability to think than a computer does currently. So yeah, we'll see.
This is where we get into questions of language very quickly, and what do we really mean, right? So, what does that mean to say that the computer is playing the game? All right, or that it's playing itself? Have they really played a game? What is the locus of agency there?
Yeah.
All right. Because what's actually happening is a script is running.
Yep.
Okay, or scripts are running, and you have essentially it's a complicated set of scripts that are interacting in a complicated way. That what is really transpiring still has a kind of mechanical quality to it, which makes me question whether you can really derive sentience or learning from what's happening there. All right? Remember, we're just looking at numbers at the end of the day, ones and zeros. Okay, and you can even say it's more basic than that. You're talking about switching an electron relay off, okay, or something to that effect, right? Okay, so I'm disconcerted by the manner in which we're so readily sort of anthropomorphizing these processes.
Yeah, and I think that's done in two parts. One, we're anthropomorphizing them purely out of convenience, probably sake of to which programmers want to think about what they're doing. So obviously, to invoke a set of perhaps more accurate words would limit their ability to strive towards something that does readily more look like play or thought, which is their goal. But I think one of the questions that I think all as humans, this is a huge question. All as humans have to ask is what is consciousness and sentience, which is that really really intriguing question.
Well,
no one has quite
really
answered yet.
Where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, exactly.
So, before addressing that specifically, let me just flesh out. Well, there's really sort of two pieces of unfinished business. I wanted to flesh out the rest of, in a very schematic way,
Sure.
how the AlphaGo program works.
How it's doing.
And then I was just clarify why I have these concerns about the language that we're applying, whether it be to like a computer program or to the question of artificial intelligence in general.
Great.
All right.
Okay, so back to the schematics.
There's a third policy network called the fast rollout network. I don't know quite how it works because counterintuitively it's a lot faster than the other two. But whereas the other two networks, they're just looking for the next move. And so what that means, whether it's the next move that would be played by a strong player or the best move, quote unquote, objectively, they were only looking 13 to 20 moves ahead in anticipation to derive their answer. By contrast, the value network that rolls things out quickly will take any given move, a move perhaps suggested by the prior two networks interface, and will then calculate the entire game's outcome from that move forward.
Or maybe not the entire game, but a couple hundred, much further.
Much farther along. But despite that, it actually ran a lot faster.
Yeah. Well, it could be because it can do those simple calculations in, I think it was like 3 microns of a second.
It was something 2 to 3 microns, yeah.
So they were able to really kind of, more
it was
effectively.
Like 15 times faster or something than the other two. The other two took like a millisecond, and they took like 2 micro. There's a non-trivial difference in rate.
Yeah, exactly.
Between how that policy network and the and then they have the resource still of using tree searches to supplement what is suggested by the algorithms which are driving the 3 policy networks. And all these 4 elements work together to then elect moves into play against the human opponent. Actually, they also played it against the best other computer AIs, and it sort of acquitted itself very well. I think it won like 80% of the time against the best, strongest competitors.
Yeah, and I think that was also giving them 4 handicap or head start stones as well.
Impressive.
Yeah.
Impressive. So, so that's just a sketch, right? You guys can go and check it out. I think actually, when they actually sat down to play the human opponent, they used special learning, the supervised learning policy network principally, because it was capable of dealing with a wider range of moves. It was actually more flexible than the reinforcement learning network. So they use that in conjunction with the fast value and the tree search. So all that being said,
so that's what's happening. That's the mechanics, right? Oh, go ahead.
Right. Those are it's very rough sketch, all right, but that's the mechanics of how AlphaGo worked. Okay. Or works. Subject to sort of, more detailed specification. If you want, you guys can go check that out. So then the question is, all right, does this represent real machine learning? Well, clearly you're looking at a refinement of certain mathematical protocols, because that's really what code is at the end of the day. Or would you agree with that as a fair characterization, Devin?
Yeah, I mean, our question, should be, what are we shooting for with machine learning? And you're saying that...
well, this just falls back to the question of learning. Like when we talk about machine learning, is the machine actually learning? What do we mean by that? And now let me elucidate, and then this is the second thing I wanted to clarify besides for the finishing the schemata. Okay, why I am anxious about this question. Okay, it's not because I'm afraid that the machines are suddenly going to develop self-awareness and overtake the universe. Okay, it's not my concern. Okay, that's not what's inspiring my anxiety. Okay, what inspires my anxiety, what inspires my concern, is that manner in which this sort of language can infect how we conceive of ourselves. And by empowering technology linguistically by attributing essentially human quality to it, there is a kind of inversion as to where I think the locus of real value should be found. And it kind of, the process sort of, the natural outcome of this process finds a kind of expression in, say, the ideal put forward by people like Ray Kurzweil of the singularity, where you're going to have this merge of the human and the technological, where they become actually seamlessly united. And some of the more committed exponents of this position, called transhumanism, will go so far as to say that we should be able to download our own consciousness into machines and thereby attain something like immortality. So the reason I become anxious about talking about machines having neural nets and learning and all the rest of it is not because I have a principled hostility even to the notion of artificial intelligence. Conceivable that you could have a sentient machine, and that, you know, deriving from that sentience, you would have to articulate a certain ethical orientation around it. I'm cool with that. But what I'm not cool is the manner in which this language can shape the discourse in a way which serves a diminishment of human significance.
Yeah, it's really more of a cultural question, you know, it becomes.
Precisely. And I talk quite a bit there, so, you know, why don't I just put it on you for a few moments to address this issue?
Sure.
Or
yeah. Well,
in general, you don't have to like follow me, like, you know, but just
not at all. Well, I think one of another issues that you and I have definitely overlapped on in the past is how, you know, the wide array of suffering that currently exists on our planet. I've not to say that, of course, good things don't exist or happen, but that there have been many injustices done throughout history and currently continue to exist. And so, you know, in lieu of all that, it seems precarious to further, you know, move the common man down on the totem pole to say, you know, there's even less of a sacredness, perhaps, to the individual, because, you know, what is the value then of a life if it truly can be replaced in every way by an inanimate object, which you know, I guess currently becomes animate. But for me, you know, it's a mixed feeling on that, because while I think that's a really real worry, you know, personally, that I have, and I'm not speaking for you, but that that we would start to treat humans maybe as machines by elevating machines to the level of humans. While that's a real worry, I think also my desire to my relatively nihilist ego kind of pushes me away from that as well, because you know, the thing is, I don't believe there is anything special about humans. I mean, of course, there's something special, but it's like, I had a teacher in high school, my favorite. He always said to the class, "You guys are special, just like everyone else." And you know, obviously, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek statement. But I often think, you know, if a meteor were to strike the planet tomorrow, which hopefully it wouldn't, I personally would not like it to. But the universe certainly would not blink an eye, bat an eye. This is on the, you know, landscape of the bigger picture of the full go board, if you will. You know, our one piece is insignificant, and so in that regard, I'm not too worried about the dethroning of humans. But that's just in the grand scheme of things. On the personal scale, you know, the suffering of humans and the possibility that we could come, you know, harm could come to us in general through dehumanizing or lifting up the machines. That's a really real, very real thing.
So,
go ahead.
Like I have like a few moments of response there.
Sure.
On the one hand, right, the concern is, I mean, just to consider the sheer magnitude of the universe, it's just unfathomable size, right?
Unfathomable.
Is even though that's like a gross factor, just mere volume, that alone, I think, is just makes it very difficult to situate human beings in an unduly central way with respect to the universe writ large, right? Subspecies Trinitatis, all right, under the species of eternity, as it were, we're just, motes, dust in the wind, all the rest of it. Okay, so that being said, all right, we are, at the end of the day, human beings. And thus we must ask, what is the human interest? And the danger that arises, in my view, is that by disproportionately focusing on whatever our position may be with respect to the broader cosmos, can create an opening which subverts how significant our consciousness is. The fact that we are aware indicates that we have an important role to play in reality itself. Because if there isn't consciousness as like or awareness as a ground, right? Then what is the significance of the universe? So there's a responsibility which accrues, in my view, to us as human beings in virtue of our sentience. And
and certainly at the scale in which we exist, this is the questions that are more relevant to our lives. Not to say that the big picture isn't important or doesn't exist, but if you exist in your thoughts only at that level, you're going to miss out on a lot because we don't live at that scale. So
additionally, I mean, you're right. We don't live at that cosmic scale, but I mean, additionally,
but it's important to keep it in mind.
I think we could really sort of look at that sort of thread and unpack more there. But I would also add that we have a responsibility to other species on the planet. Okay, we're not the only game in town in that respect. And we're going to destroy ourselves, so be it. But the problem is that the means whereby we're destroying ourselves makes us implicate in perpetrating suffering upon other species as well. Not to mention suffering upon each other, right? We can abstract, I become concerned with, you see, I guess the concern is like dismissing like the human as like a denominator of ethical orientation. And if we really are no different than inanimate matter, and that denominator is destroyed, and I don't know what the basis would be for resisting some, relatively obscene, indecent things.
Yeah, well, and that's it's a moral issue. Actually, it's kind of where it comes, because I've personally kind of battled this issue. Somebody who likes to be very logical, who likes to process information in that way, and tries to keep emotions out of it. I found that there's this level of importance in that emotion as well. And what I mean to say is that purely from a logic perspective, you know, maybe human lives don't matter, animal lives don't matter because still, you know, we don't matter in the grand scheme of the universe. And even if we were to say nuke ourselves and kill humans, but also cause, you know, massive harm to the rest of the planet, it
even that,
you know, wouldn't really, you know, things would live on, and a millennia later we wouldn't even know. But or whoever exists at the time wouldn't even know of our trespasses. But you know, emotionally, you know, I think it's important to kind of say to yourself, yeah, but that would really suck, you know. And there is again this level of the suffering, right, that would occur prior to that. And so, you know, there's not this like, how do you ethically weight? How do you know, the morality of the suffering? Because I think, you know, we like to believe that, you know, there's this idea of good and bad. It's really philosophical, right? That the global warming is a bad thing. And personally, for me and people I care about, and, you know, I care about animals too, and all that, that is a bad thing. You know, I personally enjoy the world kind of as it is. So to have a climate catastrophe would not be in my list of desired things. But I have trouble saying it's like, you know, unequivocally bad. You know, it's bad for me, but is it bad for, you know, a million years from now, the people there? Who knows?
If they're there. It's obviously not an easy thing to resolve. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind in terms of providing a counterpoint is to note that even in the determination that, oh, well, it doesn't actually matter. You're taking a stance. You're taking a valued stance, right? This
That's true. That's true.
And I say that because I want to suggest that the idea that there is a purely logical position itself is actually problematic, in that structures of logic, being as powerful as they may be, they require input to drive conclusion. So you can have all sorts of things which are formally valid, but that doesn't mean that they are actually truthful.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's also, this kind of ties into AlphaGo, right? Because really, you know, you have a thing that is maybe, you know, modeling in a microcosm this conversation, right? AlphaGo is operating much like a conscious or human brain, you know, in a pure logical thing, but it still does require input. It doesn't exist, you know, on its own, if you will.
Right, and actually, you can also look at how all this stuff that we get from machines, its significance, its meaning is imposed upon it, right? You know, because it really is just like ones and zeros. You don't even have to bring like machines into it. Just look at like an alphabet, any alphabet. Okay, what gives that alphabet meaning? How come it's not just
random squiggles?
You know,
exactly.
Chicken scratch. All right. What gives it meaning is that our awareness and our participation in the universe is what renders it meaningful. So AlphaGo's status as a Go player is a function of human attribution. If we took it out of the human universe, where would it still be a Go player? Which, I mean, you know, I mean, maybe that sounds like I'm like splitting a hair, but I think it's a very important hair.
Now, the interesting thing though is, do we assign this attribute to other things? You know, do mountains derive their value by, you know, the effect they have on humans? Rain, chickens, you know, other living beings. You know, do we perceive the value of the world purely by how, you know, that interaction with, or that, you know, modem of purpose to humans exists? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's a very interesting.
Oh, sorry. That's what I was thinking of when you said like.
No, that's in a positive way. I just realized this was interesting. I would almost go like the next point. Right. the danger of the manner in which I've couched
Mhm.
things so far is that I've sounded very humanist, which is not intrinsically bad, but what the peril, the peril that concerns me is that we then see human beings as the sole entities from
Yes.
which value flows. Okay, and that is not my position, though I can certainly understand why one may have read what I've said so far in that way. Okay, I'm saying that the value flows. If I had to say it flows from anything, I'd say it flows from sentience. It's something which arises from aware beings in the cosmos. And that sort of connects to what is essentially, my view, sort of panpsychic, where I feel that consciousness is intrinsic to the structure of the universe itself, that it's not, in fact, dependent on human beings. So that, obviously needs to be developed, right? But just as my first blush response to the concern that you mount, you're like, okay, insofar as machines and all that sort of thing, alphabets, all inherit their value from humans relating with them, what about things that are not artifacts, that are not the result of human creation or manufacture, like mountains and streams and chickens and cubs and all the rest of it, right? Is their value just a consequence of that they play some role in our mental lives? And I'm going to say no, and it's kind of the way I've already anticipated my response, because they themselves are also expressions of an underlying kind of cosmic consciousness, which I know sounds, oh God, that sounds so woo-woo, but you know what?
Okay,
there
so
it
you've added yourself
right?
in that
There it is.
one woo-woo, right? I think you're pretty not woo-woo in general, but I mean, that's okay, that's all right.
That's right.
Well, and so why would you
I would
exclude
point
then
out,
machines or anything created by humans from that cosmic consciousness?
all right, so I'm not
Sorry.
excluding
Yeah,
them
I'm putting you in a
per
hole
se.
here. Sorry.
My concern is that my concern is more with how our relationship with technology can result in self-conceptions which are deleterious to the broader prospects of human interests, human well-being, and even just the well-being of the planet in general, insofar as we have a good deal of influence on this planet. Okay, so I'm not hostile to the notion that you can have something like a machine, a sentient machine is, all right, it's sort of like this. Okay, let me use the how I think about it. It's kind of analogous to agricultural process. Okay, you have the farmer. We say that the farmer grows the plant, right? He puts seed in the ground. He waters it. He cooperates with the conjunction of a certain set of conditions, and then the plant grows. But is it utterly accurate to say that the farmer grew the plant? Where is the real agency? Like, why did the flower actually grow? It's the flower that grew.
Exactly.
Not the farmer growing the flower. Okay? So, say we cooperate to bring about a set of conditions where a sentient machine emerges. Did we really create that intelligence? No, we sort of participated in the establishment of certain conditions of possibility, but the sentience of that machine is an expression of underlying principles of the architecture of the cosmos, about which we have nothing to do.
Yep, exactly. Oh man, that's beautifully said. Thank you.
So I'm not hostile to the notion of a sentient machine emerging. But that's not the focus of my concern. The focus of my concern is that the whole discourse around this issue is not actually contributing to the emergence of a sentient machine, or even a correct way to contemplate how we might interact with such a being. It, to me, represents a fetishization of technology that is being used to evade more fundamental responsibilities. And that's where I get hung up. That's where I get hung up. And it's not an uninformed, crude Ludditism. Okay, and by the way, that Luddites get a bad rap. They're more sophisticated than the common use of that term would have suggested. Okay, it's rather just a call for us to ask, why are we pursuing technology along these particular lines?
And also, I mean, our value of technology, I think, is skewed in general. I mean, at what point does the helpfulness of technology actually get in the way of maybe things that you could say, quote, really matter, quote, in life? I mean, the idea of technology initially, you invented the axe to chop wood, because I guess beating it with stone was a lot of work, and so you created a labor-saving device, and that benefited your life for a good purpose. And then you created the wheel, or all these technologies. These are more prehistoric, but in general, for labor-saving devices. But at what point does the labor-saving device actually get in the way of saving you or enhancing one's well-being? And I think this is kind of where technology has got today. Is we're often seeing now social media, for example, which of course we're on. In some ways, I mean, and that's why you got to be careful, I think, getting in the way of connecting with other people as opposed to actually enhancing that connection. And you find the world today more than ever, people feeling lonely and feeling a lacking sense of community and connection with others, which is, of course, something that we as humans, social animals, crave. And cars, for example, they help us get around faster, but they also have the trade-off of if it's a gasoline car, using fossil fuels, which are harming the planet. So okay, we get around faster now, but then we have untold harms done to our health and to the environment, and so the question that you have to say, okay, we hold technology so high. Oh, we'd never give up cars, but why aren't we holding things like our health and the environment, which truly matter to us, more higher? And that's kind of where the fetishization of technology scares me. I like connecting over Facebook. I like being able to talk with you right now online. But if I were to hear, unequivocally that this was creating a net loss on our relationship as friends or on my health, I would stop. And I think that's it's harder to see that though sometimes.
There's it requires, I think, an incredible discipline, a personal discipline to relate with these technologies in ways that are positive and enhancing, as opposed to corrosive, right? And I guess it's a cliche to say it, but you can look at how we use. So I struggle myself. I have the so-called smartphone, and there's that temptation which really undermines my presence with the people with whom I happen to be interacting, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I got to check this text message and all that sort of thing, and it's it really, I feel torn, and I can even experience a compulsion, mild compulsion to go and check that message or whatever, and it takes you out of that space where you actually are. Where are you actually? Okay.
And we also become in service to those machines. We're taking now our life energy to maintain, that the electronics attention in a way. It's kind of coming back onto us, saying, hey, obviously it's a friend over the electronics, but or maybe it's not. Maybe it's actually the machine itself saying, hey, I need a software update like I experienced tonight, or the battery's low and
you gotta go get a new battery for your car, or if you like, so it's a little bit different, but like they say, oh, your house ends up owning you, right?
Exactly.
It's the same sort of thing. Okay, you have to, and with software updates, right? That takes time, and then it also requires that you expend certain economic resources to gain access to these technologies. We got to get back to the question of like, why are we choosing these technologies and that other technologies?
Yeah.
Right. What are the criteria?
And the value we choose to place on those, kind of relates back to, again, that artificial intelligence and the worth of a thinking quote unquote computer, a learning computer. Because if we were to say this computer is alive, what does that mean? It can think, it can learn, it can feel even. What does that truly mean for us as humans? I mean, do we then say, we have of equal value? You would value the life of quote unquote, of a computer to equal that of a human. And I think in some ways we make those small choices, in our daily lives and our actions of how we value our own life, energy, and time to that of technology and to things in general. And
that latter connection, it actually brought to mind was the Turing test, right? The so-called Turing test, which when I heard what the Turing test was, I was actually mildly flabbergasted, unless I misunderstood it, right? But the Turing test wants to say that we will have an intelligent machine when a person can interact with that machine and not realize that they're a machine. Meaning that what's necessary is not an actual internal life, which to me would seem to be an indispensable part of what it is to be alive, on the part of the machine in question, but merely that they could exhibit certain patterns of response. Interestingly, the number one ranked ELO player said that in looking over the games that AlphaGo played with the professional, whose name unfortunately eludes me at the moment, he could not discern the difference between AlphaGo's moves and that of the human player, which means that AlphaGo has, in a sense, passed the Turing test.
As far as Go players go, it has, and that's.
Can you seriously? But can you say that like is a truly intelligent, truly aware entity?
No, certainly not. But that's the idea it's moving toward is if it could learn Go, maybe it could learn. Using similar methodologies of computation, could learn how to converse. It could learn how to learn. It could start saying,
learn how to translate.
Yeah,
that's the question: is it really learning? And I'm not trying to be like, oh.
Well, the question is, what does it mean to learn, right? And
the reason,
if we allow the comparison of humans and machines to exist, say we allow learning to be defined in a manner in which a machine could learn. We're not excluding them from that. Then I'd say learning, could be defined as something similar as putting it in short and long term databases, and that's kind of really, in short, what our mind does is it creates neural networks of connections that are both stored away in short and long-term synapses.
So
our brain does.
That's what our brain does.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm not convinced that that's what our mind does.
There's a difference again between mind and brain. Yeah.
And the reason being, and we already mentioned this, it comes all the way back to the question of consciousness, right? What does it mean to know something? And consciousness. I'm using consciousness in a very broad way at this moment. Okay, to me,
to know,
indispensable, and to truly knowing, right? So I really find it difficult to believe that a calculator really knows that 2 + 2 = 4. Is it like when you press 2 + 2 and then the equal button and the 4 comes up on the screen? Does the calculator have an experience of the indomitable certitude of that mathematical sentence? Like I do. Okay, I have
to. But or do you? Does your mind?
Okay.
Does your mind convince you that you've had that experience when in reality you've just recalled a fact much like a computer, but then you have this extra level of conflation brought on by whatever consciousness is, so it's like a mix of both. Like you have the calculator, but you also have another layer that makes it feel more.
Even if I'm being there's that, I think that in a sense whether what I'm apprehending is true or false is almost moot to the deeper question of having an experience, like an encounter, a knowing. There's a suchness that and you'll find this. You look at the literature about questions of consciousness, right? It's outside of our ability to define. Okay, you'll find that in many definitions of consciousness, right? That you're talking about a quality which is in a way, it's outside of language. It's a precondition of language, but it's outside of language, and it's like a ground that does not seem to me explicable in mechanical or formulaic terms. And because it is not amenable to that sort of reduction, I question whether it can really be understood as simply the outcome of so many electrochemical processes.
You done much foray into the quote mechanical, but not actually not actually machine, like learning or learning of say viruses or other organic things that have that don't have a mind per se, but still kind of evolutionarily trial and error almost learn things? Or
well, I can't say I've looked too much in that direction, but my view generally on the question of learning in life and life forms. Some people debate, for example, whether viruses constitute life. To me, it doesn't pose a great problem because it relates to the underlying thesis that I mentioned earlier, that consciousness itself is intrinsic to the structure of the universe, and that life forms are expressions of that. So in some measure, I would say that the learning of a virus reflects a small way consciousness, which is built into the structure of reality.
I would then challenge and only say that perhaps you're being unnecessarily divisive in discluding computational technology from that consciousness and learning ability. I would say then that if a virus can learn not exactly the same way, right? But it has that hierarchical ability of consciousness to be able to learn than a ones and zeros coming out of a purely logical machine acts in a similar way to the purely chemical learning of a virus. Yeah, challenge,
Well,
but
I'll
not
think about it.
we're none of us are
Though
experts.
my skepticism, right. My skepticism sort of derives. I think that computation is something which can be deployed by a conscious entity, but I don't think that it is something which of itself
constitutes consciousness. Yeah, and surely not.
produce,
So that's why I think
can produce
that
consciousness.
obviously AIs,
Now, look,
have not achieved that artificial intelligence or consciousness yet. But maybe that is still possible, and that's kind of the question is. Oh yeah, sure.
I do want to note that I'm not sort of discluding machines, as I noted earlier, per se from potentiality for consciousness, right? So I just don't think that computational model.
Yeah, so they could maybe achieve consciousness, but they currently don't, and so therefore it's hard to say. Maybe I'm just trying to clarify. Hard to say that AlphaGo is learning because it doesn't have that level of consciousness. That learning.
Right, exactly. That without consciousness, I question whether learning is really occurring in
So I would say learning is only occurring in the in the subset of the way a mind learns, right? It's beginning to kind of create almost synaptic connections, but it's not per se doing so with a sense of self or consciousness or purpose, that it hasn't been granted to it by humans or some other being currently.
So what I have to additionally, there's two open questions. One is that requires clarification, and that is what does it mean to learn? And so that level itself has multiple strata. What are the mechanics of learning? And then, does consciousness play a necessary role in it? And the other set of questions revolve around whether the computational prowess of computers represented an avenue which is genuinely learning. Hey, I'll tell you what, though. I think we're going to go ahead, if you want, and wrap it up.
Yeah, sounds good. We covered a lot today.
Conversation, because we're coming up on around an hour, and probably I'll have to leave where I am shortly, regardless. But maybe we can go ahead and reconvene next Thursday. We could talk about it anyway, and we could just sort of pick it up where we've landed, which is the relationship between learning and consciousness.
Let's wrap it up this evening with a little synopsis, and then or something. And then next time, perhaps if you still want to talk about, let's talk about learning, but let's talk about human learning and education, and then perhaps even kind of the mode in which all of this exists, society and community as an important part of society, and one that I've obviously put a lot of focus and energy into.
Outstanding.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, thank you, Devin. Did you want? I think we're good to go.
Yeah, I'll make a concluding remark. So for me, the thing that I'm watching right now for Google to do is, what sort of progress can they make between now and upcoming March 5th? They have a challenge against Lee Sedol, who is in my opinion, number 2 in the world to Koje, but some people still consider him number 1. He has decades of skill, so he's one of the best players in the world, and how they'll go against him, because the professional that Google beat is only a 2-dan professional in Europe, a relatively weak professional. So if Google can beat him, that's great, but can they beat the best human in the world? And this kind of becomes the Kasparov moment where Deep Blue beats Kasparov like in chess. And so if between the 5 months they've had to work, if they can beat the world champion, that'll show some massive improvement. And to have that kind of improvement in that kind of time would really hint at the possibility that some sort of learning is occurring, because the quality of programming is just you can only do so much as somebody who's trying to, like, say, write a script for something to complete and do well, a program or but we kind of believe that human potential is in many ways kind of unlimited. If I could play more Go, I would get better at Go, if I had more time. And so in a way, if it just by, focusing itself into this task gets better, that'd be really interesting and unique, world-changing event. So we'll have to talk maybe even again sometime after March 5th to see how that unfolds. But that's kind of what I'm looking forward to. I'm just excited to be able to talk about my favorite game, Go. So thanks for having me on, Tom.
Thank you, Devin. I appreciate it. I'll put this up later this evening on the YouTubes, and I'll send you a link. So to speak.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Talk to you later, Devin.
Talk to you later.
Bye.